be pretty much this book plus the Round 10 core rulebook should be everything that you need in order to play any horror game, at least any one of those 5 subgenres. So you're probably wondering, what subgenres am I dealing with? The 5 subgenres, and I'll also list major inspirations for these subgenres as well. So if you want to do further reading or watching in the case of films, because I'm going to be honest, a lot of Round 10 inspiration comes from film. You can look into it from there. But so those 5 subgenres. The first one is survival horror, obviously. I say obviously because that is the most popular version of horror in at least modern media and in modern entertainment. What makes survival horror is the fact that you're taking horror, so you're taking the fear elements, you're taking the tension, you're taking the uncertainty, and you're dealing with the imagination of the audience and the game master, and you're dealing with fear. And what makes it survival is that the conflict at the core of it is man versus nature. It's people, the protagonists, aka the players in this case, surviving against nature, against the world, against the environment. Now, obviously, zombies, people would be like, are zombies considered nature? Well, in this case, they would be, because they're a force of nature. They're not a character. They're not an event. They're something that happens. They're like a tornado. They're like a flood. They're like a drought. How do you deal with this situation? How do you survive against this situation that is actively, maybe not even actively, but that is working against you? Yeah, so that's survival horror. Surviving in a situation where your basic needs cannot be met easily. So that's the first one. Obviously, some enemies for that would be different kinds of zombies, different kinds of generic human enemies like raiders and bandits and stuff like that. Maybe do some Mad Max type stuff, get some vehicle play in there as well. But really, survival horror, post-apocalyptic is what you could call it as well. But survival horror would kind of be the idea. The next subgenre is one of my personal favorites, and that is science fiction horror. Now, the biggest thing about science fiction horror, okay, so it's horror, so you're dealing with fear, and you're dealing with the unknown. But with science fiction horror, there is an explanation for whatever is happening. If it's a monster movie, there's a reason for this monster to be there. There is something that the players or the protagonists or the center characters of the story have to figure out. Maybe it is a formula to combat this virus. Maybe it is a weakness that this alien has. There's a very scientific feel to it. So there's fact, there's research, there's a lot of the story is based in science, in factual knowledge. So the characters and the players will have to deal with that. A lot of it will be investigation, and a lot of it could be combat as well. Good examples of science fiction horror, in my opinion, Sphere, the book by Michael Crichton. Wonderful book. Calling it horror is maybe a little bit of a stretch. It's really more of a suspense book, but that would kind of deal with what I'm thinking of when it comes to science fiction horror, something like that. So we've got survival and science fiction. The third type would be cosmic horror. Now, a lot of you are going to be very familiar with cosmic horror and what that means. But in case you're not, cosmic horror is a lot like science fiction horror. There's something that's different about the world. It could be an alien, it could be a being, it could be a supernatural entity or malicious being of some sort. But the difference between cosmic horror and science fiction horror is that in cosmic horror, conspiracy plays a big part of it. There's usually an active group trying to cover up what's going on, or there's a group that is trying to act in secret to fuel what's going on. And the key to cosmic horror is the fact that the protagonists, or the players, will never understand fully what's going on. Now, okay, the players might, but the characters never will. With cosmic horror, there is a lot going on that is simply out of the range of comprehension of human beings. There is this entity that exists beyond the scope of our scope of reality, and we'll never know its true form, or if we ever knew its true form, we would perish or go insane from the thought of it or from the sight of it. That's cosmic horror. Call of Cthulhu, obviously. I mean, that's the story that started it all for cosmic horror. The works of H.P. Lovecraft are the backbone of cosmic horror writing. So yeah, the Cthulhu mythos in general, that's cosmic horror. Otherwise, Stephen King's It, The Thing, the film The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing from 1982, that has a cosmic horror feel to it. Sure, there's some science fiction horror in there as well, but it's still kind of a cosmic horror feeling about it. So that's 3. We got survival, science fiction, cosmic. Gothic horror would be another one I'd cover. And Gothic horror is very popular right now. And whether or not it's horror, again, horror implies that there's a sense of fear, a sense of dread and terror that's ever present throughout this game or this story. There's a feeling of suspense. The Gothic part of it, which I'm not using Gothic in the general term, it's more just for this genre. But the Gothic part of Gothic horror comes in the fact that it's represented by supernatural beings that the players may even be able to control. Vampires, werewolves, stuff like that. These creatures that exist either within humanity or amongst humanity. They could exist in secret, but they deal with humanity in a way that could be detrimental, but it brings up a lot of questions of survivability. The vampire is feeding off of humans. Is that morally right? That's the only way the vampire can live. Is that right for the vampire to do that? It deals with questions of humanity versus survival. Gothic horror. And then finally, and one that I'm really excited only because this one is hard, very hard to do in tabletop role-playing. And as far as I know, it hasn't been done in tabletop role-playing. It very well may have. I don't know. But psychological horror. And this, the inspiration for this is drawn heavily from Silent Hill. The games, Silent Hill 2 and 3 primarily, but if you just think of Silent Hill, the franchise as a whole, and you think of everything that franchise was built around and the ideas that kind of come with it. In psychological horror, the entities that are causing the fear, or the antagonistic forces in these stories, are direct manifestations or symbolic manifestations of the fears, the motivations, and the actions of the characters in the stories. Insanity is a huge part of psychological horror. In psychological horror, you're often dealing with characters who are not good characters. They're not heroes. The classic example, and if you haven't played Silent Hill, spoiler alert, skip the next 30 seconds or whatever of this video. If you haven't played, or in Silent Hill 2, you play the character James Sunderland. By the end of the video game, you realize that James Sunderland, the whole game he's searching for his wife, who has died years ago, but he got a letter recently from her. He murdered his wife. He's not a good person. That's usually the case. And then all of the enemies and a lot of the traps and a lot of the puzzles that James deals with through Silent Hill are direct representations of how he views himself, how he viewed his wife, how he views women in general, and these different motivations, these different fears, and these different judgments that he has in his mind. So a lot of the enemies that will be statted out in this part of the book for the psychological horror will be things that will represent abstract ideas or situations that can occur in a character's life. So there might be a monster that's related to alcoholism. There might be a monster that's related to an abusive relationship. There might be a monster that's related to a sexually abusive relationship. It's going to deal with topics that are tough, but that will create kind of this uneasiness, this disturbing sense of dread, and yet also familiarity. With psychological horror, the main story arc is usually the characters, or the central characters of this story, are coming to terms with acts that have happened to them or that they have committed in their past. And usually, through the course of that story arc and through the course of coming to terms with those, they're traveling through different areas, or maybe they're caught in an installation or whatever. So those are the 5 subgenres of horror that I really want to tackle with Otherworld, and I'm really looking forward to really digging into that. So, yeah, again, that's going to come after Zimmeldron, sometime after Zimmeldron. I know Zimmeldron is the next book. I know the core rulebook obviously is the first one. There might be a Zimmeldron expansion between that and Otherworld. I'm not 100% sure yet. It kind of depends on the reception that Zimmeldron gets. But I'm really excited to really put this horror aspect of role-playing into action. So, yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about. As always, if you have any questions, comments, and concerns or criticisms, you know how to get a hold of me. Feedback is always appreciated. Leave comments, send emails, post messages, however you want to do it. I am really open to the feedback. So, and that's about it, I guess. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening, and I hope you enjoy this week. I will get back to you later on this week with another video post, probably sometime right before our next